As we know, Maura Healey's inauguration made both state and U.S. history last week as the first woman elected governor of Massachusetts and one of two out lesbian governors elected nationwide in November. And Healey made history at her previous post, too, as the country's first out gay attorney general. But despite her longtime public profile, Healey has kept much of her personal life private. That is, until this week. Healey and her partner of 2 years, her former deputy at the AG's office, Joanna Lydgate, gave an interview to Boston Globe columnist Yvonne Abraham that came out Monday. In it, Healey explained her reasons for maintaining her privacy, saying, "Holding on to my personal relationships and close-knit circle probably helped me get through the last 8 years. But now that she's in the corner office on Beacon Hill, how much of her private life does she owe the public?" I'm joined now by Arline Isaacson, co-chair, Massachusetts Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, along with Democratic activist and writer Mary Breslauer. Welcome to both of you. Arline, we'll just go to it. It's certainly a historic moment for everyone, but especially celebrating it here in the home of marriage equality in Massachusetts.
You're so right, Sue. I mean, we have how historic and how moving this whole thing has been to have an out and proud lesbian who is articulate and hardworking and caring and thoughtful and compassionate, who candidly I think is going to make a fabulous governor, but very importantly, who was supported overwhelmingly in her election and overwhelmingly by straight men and women. And that's incredible and historic and wonderful. So, well, go ahead.
I was going to say, Mary, I've spent a lot of time in the past week speaking to colleagues and other folks in the news business, talking about the story that broke in the Globe about Maura Healey's relationship and trying to explain to them that it's not quite as salacious as they may think it is, because the avenues to institutional relationships were not available. And also, being who we are, you know, being a little baby lesbian, you didn't necessarily know you were a little baby lesbian until later. Can you just talk about, for our audience, what we didn't have the avenues to when we were born prior to maybe 2003?
Well, I mean, I think you just really have to go to our sort of young adulthood. I mean, it was 1990 and WFNX had 1 in 10, you know, the first LGBT radio show in the country. And I have to tell you, Sue, and, you know, you were so involved in the second half of that show. To this day, somebody stops me and says, "Are you Mary Breslauer?" I can't tell you how important it was for me to have that radio outlet. There was no internet. Libraries did not carry our books. And as you know, this was a show that was on from like 10 to midnight. So people could go home and put their transistor radio on if you were in high school and listen to people talking about LGBT lives that they had no indication was out there. You know, you look at the polling. In the mid-1990s, 68% of the country was opposed to marriage equality. Today, 70% of the country is for marriage equality. You know, the AIDS epidemic, as tragic and horrific as that was, compelled many of us to come out. You know, many people who were in the closet came out. You go to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that horrendous and disgrace policy that Clinton put into place. And you had the covers of Time magazine and Newsweek with patriotic LGBT Americans serving their country. And it became very difficult to ignore us. So that, I think, was sort of the modern age, 20th century sort of lead up to the marriage equality front. But, you know, the numbers have flipped in the last 25 years. And it has a lot to do with, you know, why we have Maura Healey as our governor today.
And Arline, to Mary's point, though, the other side of this is we're now at a point where we've got the Don't Say Gay business happening in Florida, challenges for trans individuals in the United States. You know, I'm reading story after story of trans folks saying, "I'm considering leaving the United States because I don't feel safe here." From another front, we've had an attempt on a sitting governor kidnapping the governor of Michigan, and we've got a very divisive and violent faction of Americans. And I've been saying I can understand why almost any elected official would want to keep their private life private. And talking about the ways that, you know, maybe it's time for us to have a governor's mansion here in Massachusetts as well. I mean, you know, Charlie Baker and his family having gone through a number of protests on their front lawn, which I'm not sure really moved the ball forward on any of the issues that folks were protesting.
Well, you're right. We're in a very difficult time right now. But if you recall, it wasn't just over the last several decades. There have been so many vile, ugly, false things said about us 30, 40, even 20 years ago. Accusations and condemnations that were nowhere near anything having to do with the reality of our lives. We made it through those for the most part, certainly in Massachusetts, enough to have gotten to a point, as Mary rightly points out, where an out lesbian can be elected governor. And that's enormous. It's absolutely huge. Yes, the pendulum swings, and it swung back against us in the ways you just described. But sitting there watching the inauguration last week was so meaningful and so moving that I became teary watching it. And I'm a pretty hardened old battle axe. Yeah, I didn't think anything like that could get to me anymore. But it was really moving. We were watching history being made. It was profound and it was important. And yes, things are bad in lots of places in the country. And we have Nazis here going after our community that we're going to have to fight against. But we've made it a long way.
Mary, you write about the inauguration in the Vineyard Gazette, and both of you have worked in politics here in Massachusetts for decades. And I know, Mary, that you were working in a world where you were probably one of the only lesbians and likely one of the few women in the offices of the halls of power. And until recently, Massachusetts didn't have a really great scorecard when it came to statewide leadership for women. And it seems we've really just kind of leapfrogged ahead here. But talk about what the inauguration meant to you and what you saw and the feelings that it brought up, since Arlene's opened the door about talking about feelings. Let's talk about feelings, Mary. How did you feel?
Yeah, well, why not? Why not? Look, you know, what I wrote about was the inaugural party, and to see the floor of the Boston Garden, that parquet floor with the 17 championship banners hanging from the sky, filled with women and girls and LGBT people waving, you know, rainbow light sticks, and Brandi Carlile being the lead entertainment. You know, Brandi and her wife, who came to Massachusetts in 2012 to marry here. I mean, to me, it just so encapsulated so much of what the three of us have lived through, with the battle scars to show it, right? And, you know, yes, a sea change. I mean, you know, Arline remembers it was one of the ugliest moments in state government, bar none, the Babbitt and Jean foster care case, where the caucus took two boys away from two loving gay fathers, who, by the way, later adopted 4 boys who are now adults. You know, clearly it had nothing to do but about the caliber of their parenthood. And everybody went back in the closet back then. And I happened to be in state government. I decided not to resign because I realized if I resigned, there was nobody who was going to be out in state government. Now think about that. That was I'm taking a guess here, 84, 85, 86, mid-80s, yeah. And, you know, look at where we are today. So yes, a very different time. Just the civil rights bill, how difficult that was to get through Arline. The AIDS policies, all of it was a battle. So yes, look, we live in a country where, and particularly now, where are these huge divisions, but I sort of feel there's more light there. There's just more light there. And there's more support there than I think the far right magnet extremists would have you believe. And I think we saw that, as Arline pointed out, we saw that in the overwhelming numbers for Maura Healey. And I would add for Andrea Campbell, who will be our first Black Attorney General. So, you know, honestly, Massachusetts has always been a great place to be. And you feel it sort of even more profoundly after what's transpired in the last week, at least for me,
You know, Arline, I often joke that we'll know whatever constituency we're talking about, we'll have equity when we can just be mediocre, right? Like we can be mediocre like everyone else. We don't have to be exceptional. And I remember I was hosting 1 in 10 one night, and a year, you know, and whenever it was, decades ago, and a teenager called in and said something like, you know, someday we'll get to a point where being gay won't be the most interesting part of you. And I was struck by this week, or this period where we've got, you know, Governor Healey, and we've got other openly gay governors and openly elected officials, and then we've got George Santos, the congressman from New York, who we think is openly gay. We don't know. He could, maybe he's not. Who knows? You know, we don't even know if that is his name. But I've been struck by the coverage of him, that whether him being gay is, again, the least interesting part of the story, and actually doesn't really even fall into the coverage of it. So there is a moment to take and say, well, that's progress too, no?
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, if George Santos is gay, we're going to reject his certification and take it back.
Take the card back, Arline. Take the card back. Yeah.
And you know, you're right. It's less of a big deal than it once was, though in the historic context, it's really a big freaking deal. And the fact of the matter is that for Maura, when I saw that headline, that story, I was simultaneously thrilled for her. Although, as a friend said, the woman is so hot that probably it broke the hearts of a lot of lesbians in the state. But I was thrilled for her, because you do, in a very intense political environment, you do need a safe haven, a place where you can love and be protected in family. And so I was thrilled for her. And candidly, what a fabulous couple. Two smart, bright, attractive women who have dedicated so much of their professional lives to public service. That's a great duo, in my opinion.
All right, Arline Isaacson and Mary Breslauer, thank you for all that you do, and great to see you. Hopefully, we'll see you in person sometime soon. Thanks for joining us on Greater Boston.
Hope
Thanks.
so.